Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of Gemini Rising, Two Curious Minds. Joining me is my co-host, Dr. Anne Wohlcke. And
Hello.
Thank you so much for doing this show with me. I love that we get to have these conversations. For anyone that hasn't seen the first show yet, that is up on my main YouTube page. That is with David Lawrence Palmer, the Leo King, as our guest. And we have plenty more incredible guests lined up. But we thought before we got into all of the guests, that all of you watching might like to get to know Anne and I a little bit better and why we called the show Gemini Rising and just a little bit more about who we are. So here we are, Anne.
Here we are finally being Gemini Risings. It took a while for us to get here tonight. I don't know if that's why, but you know.
I feel like that's the energy of the week. I mean, anyone that is on High Vibe TV knows that the energy has been wild. We've all talked about it in the different shows that we do over there. And, you know, I'm feeling better today probably than I have all week. I feel like I'm starting to come out of that really heavy energy. But my Gemini mind is taking over. We had initially planned to do this on Tuesday, and both of us were messaging each other and saying, we're not feeling very Gemini. We just can't do it, or can't do it in the way, I guess, that we wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm. It was a difficult day. Remember, that was the day that Mercury was almost cazimi with the sun, which I know we're not an astrology show, even though we're named after the astrological trait that we share. Yes. But Mercury is our ruling planet, and it was being burnt out by the sun. Plus, Neptune's attacking Natalie right now.
Oh, man, in such a big way. But that's okay. I'm almost through the worst of it.
Yes. So here we are, but I feel so much better today. I don't know if you do, but
yeah, I do. I did have a sneaky nap this afternoon. I was still feeling just a little heavy in the head, and I think that is more Neptune sitting on top of my Mars, along with my Mercury and my midheaven. So it's a lot. And I think Pluto's squaring all of that as well at the same time. You know, it's all happening, but I'm definitely feeling lighter than I have for the rest of the week. So you and I are not only both Gemini risings, but we are opposites in the astrology wheel. I'm an Aries and you're a Libra. And I'm curious as to how you find being a Gemini or Gemini rising and having that influencing your life when you're a Libra versus how I find it as an Aries. And I didn't understand anything about my rising or anything like that until I was older.
Mm-hmm.
People would do my chart and I would look at it and go, okay, but I didn't understand what it meant. And it's only been in the last probably 15 years that I've really gotten a good grasp on it. What about for you?
Well, so for the Gemini rising aspect, so I was just showing you a book that I had because my mom had it, and actually she got me a used copy of it because I've been hounding her to find that book. And so this is a book that I grew up with. So I know I had my chart done, and I always knew that I was Gemini rising and that I was a Libra, and I have a Libra moon also. And I knew this. My mom actually got me an astrology reading when I was pretty young as well. And I still remember some of the things that woman said about me. But I don't really think I knew what Gemini rising meant until more recently. And unfortunately, what's interesting about it is that there are a lot of people who don't have the best idea or understanding of what a Gemini is. There's a lot of negative ideas about Gemini energy out there.
I would completely agree with that. There are people that go, oh, Gemini, I knew it. And I think, hang on, we're not that bad, because So I'm not only Gemini rising, I'm Gemini moon. And I find it interesting that you're Libra sun, Libra moon. So we both have that double dose of these different planets sort of going on for us.
Mhm.
And I get it. I mean, every sign has positive and negative traits. And this life is about what we can transcend and what we can shift in our own life. And it's about being the best version of ourselves. And not everybody chooses to accept that mission. And I think that Geminis can have this very dual sort of personality where there is a hidden side to them. But I also think it can just mean that we're very layered and it's okay. So the best way I can describe this, many years ago, I was dating someone and it was the first time we went on a trip. And anyone that knows me knows I talk a lot. And even this ex at one point said to me, he goes, Nat, you chatter a lot. And I said, I do. And he said, I don't always listen. I went, I don't think I need you to listen. Like, it's fine. Because sometimes I'm just talking to me, right? And I get
Mhm.
this is part of this Gemini rising, Gemini moon sort of quality that I have. And so we're traveling, and we had obviously spent nights together and things like that, but we'd never traveled. Anyway, it was the first morning of us being on this trip together. And he gets up, he goes, good morning. I'm like, good morning. And I don't know how I was awake before him because that never happens. But I was sitting on the couch reading a book, and he's moving around, and I'm just reading my book. I'm just sitting quietly. And he says, are you okay? I said, yeah, I'm fine. He goes, do you want some breakfast? And I said, yeah, but are we going out? He says, yeah. So, but in the meantime, he gives me some fruit, makes me a cup of tea, and I'm just sitting there. And in the end, he turns around and goes, what is wrong with you? Nothing's wrong. Why? He goes, you're quiet. And I said, it happens. He goes,
Mhm.
no, you're never quiet. And I went, actually, I am. And I do. So there's this public side of me that's very lively, very chatty, very, sort of out there. And then there is a side to me that when I go home and when I'm very comfortable in my surroundings, it's very quiet, very calm. And I feel where so many people think, to have that dual nature, it has to be good and bad.
Mhm.
Whereas I look at it and go, it can be anything. It's just
Mhm.
there are so many different sides to us versus being a personality type that is, this is who you are and that's kind of what it is. And I don't think either is good or bad, but I think
Yeah.
there's that perception of it.
Mhm. Right. So we are being so Gemini rising at the moment and having such air energy because we just kind of started talking and jumped into this. And I do want to mention for people that, right, so today we are talking about ourselves and we're introducing ourselves and talking about why we chose the name Gemini Rising. And we won't be making every show only be about Gemini things. But
Oh, correct.
the fact of the show is that and I do want to get back to this idea of how I'm a Libra, you're an Aries, but we share this other Gemini energy. It's that we both have such similar minds. When I got to know you, Natalie, which was when you first started to come to do full disclosure at High Vibe, and I feel that we seem very different people. We look very different. We do different things, but you would start talking and I'd think, what? She cares about that and she thinks that and I think that. And when we found out that we were Gemini rising, both of us, and our degrees are very, very close, right? It is very similar. I think we do present ourselves differently, but we both have that Gemini rising trait of how we present to the world, that we're the type of people who will start conversations, are curious. We ask a lot of questions. And I think that's why we thought we needed to do a podcast together, because we ask a lot of questions and we're both interested in spirituality. So our show, or the objective of our show, is that we want to ask a lot of questions of spiritual people. So we're doing that. We're testing it out on ourselves on this episode.
And I think this is a trait of mine because my mind is always going. I forget sometimes that people aren't a part of my thought process or the conversations that we've been having. So Anne and I, in the lead up to this, have been sort of going, do you think this is a show we should do, or should we dive in with another guest? And I forget that everybody watching has not been a part of all of that. And you don't know why we're here. We're just doing our thing. But you're absolutely right. I had heard about you. I obviously knew David before I started coming to the studio, but I'd heard about you. And I remember that first night we sat for hours before the show actually went live because we were talking. And I remember after we were done, and I don't remember at what point this was, but David said to me, Anne likes you. And I said, how do you know? He goes, she won't sit there and have those conversations with somebody if she doesn't like them. But
how funny. That's actually something I wanted to talk about Gemini Risings. It reminds me of it. But if you wanted to see, that's the other thing. We'll jump in and talk and go back to topics and all that. So if I'm interrupting you and you want to finish that thought, please do, Natalie.
Well, all I was going to say was I think it took us a little while to realize just how similar we are. And it's right. I mean, your focus is history. You're a professor of history. And I always feel so lucky when I get to sit there and listen to you and David have conversations. And I'm not just talking about the shows that you do together, History in the Stars, or any of the specials that you guys have done together. They're fascinating. But to be present when you guys are just talking, because history it's not my main focus, but at the same time, you and I do seem to have the same questions of many, many things. And I love when you and I are sitting at the studio together and there is someone there, and it's never been planned, but it's sometimes like a tag team that we're both just shooting questions at people. And I think sometimes people find it a little overwhelming, but for the most part, I think people appreciate that we're curious about who they are and what they're doing. And I think more than anything, it's a craving for knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry. So I'm like, wait, where should I jump in? But
Anyway you want.
The thing I wanted to say about it's interesting that David Palmer, for those of you who aren't on High Vibe, it's interesting that he said I don't always talk to everyone, and that's true. And this is something that I looked into in the lead up to this show. I was doing a lot of research on what is Gemini Rising, just to see what's the impression that's out there. Since we're claiming to be Gemini Rising, what are we supposed to be like? And one of the interesting things, and I really love this aspect of astrology. First of all, everybody has Gemini in their charts. So wherever your rising sign is dictates where Gemini falls in your chart, right? So we happen to have Gemini in the first house. So that means we embody Gemini energy. And of course, I mean, like, I can't stop talking with my hands, and that's one of the traits, right? Guilty. Natalie is so much better at being refined and on camera, and I'm constantly shifting and going like, to make my points.
I shift all the time and do this so many times, especially in the beginning with David when we would be doing Full Disclosure. The minimum of once every show I would hit that microphone, and then I'd be pulling some weird face trying to stop it from reverberating down the lines for everybody.
Exactly. But okay, so one of the things that I watched was somebody going over Gemini Rising, and you look at your first house is Gemini. So this is just sort of thinking of equal houses. Your second house is Cancer. Your third house is Leo. Your fourth house is Virgo. And I thought that was really interesting. The way they described it is that your fourth house, that's your emotions. And what's interesting about Geminis is that they tend to keep things, they keep a lot of their deep emotions quiet, but they're good at talking and making people feel welcome and all of this. But also some Geminis can tend to get analytical and embody the Virgo type of Mercury as well. So I can definitely get into the studious quiet mode, and I can alternate between very introverted and extroverted. I don't think I ever qualify for very extroverted. I mean, you can see in our introduction, right, with the pictures of us as kids, I think we embodied that as children, right? I was a lot more extroverted when I was a kid. What about you?
I actually think I was probably more introverted, and I think that goes back to the environment that I grew up in. I wasn't that close with my sisters. I kind of struggled being in that all-female environment, and I think I moved out of home when I was about, I don't know if I was 15 or 16, it might have been 16, and I ended up moving in with my dad, and from 16 onwards was when I really started feeling comfortable in who I was, and then once I was feeling comfortable, then I started coming out of my shell, and the sort of funnier side of me started coming out because I'd always been told I wasn't funny, and I will tell everyone I'm hilarious.
You are.
It depends. I think part of what people find funny, though, is that I'm incredibly awkward. But when I am awkward, instead of being mortified and running away, I will laugh harder than anybody else at how awkward I have just made whatever situation. And I think that puts everybody else at ease. I think I can be seen as very outgoing. And so, what people find really strange is if I'm in a work situation, so having modeled my entire life, having had to get up on a stage and with a microphone, I can do all of that if I know it's a work thing. If I'm going somewhere and meeting people, a restaurant is okay, but a bar or something like that, I get so incredibly uncomfortable and shy. And so, if I'm meeting people, I will call them and say, "Can you please come out the front and meet me?" And they'll say, "No, just come in and wear." And I'm like, "No, I need you to come outside and meet me." And people think that it's high maintenance. It's not. I get so incredibly shy and uncomfortable. And they look at me and go, "You're shy?" I go, "I just am." And as far as the emotions, I have been told that I can be a bit of an enigma. And I think for the reason that you were talking about, that we're very good at guiding people with their emotions. I'm everybody's counselor. People will call me, certain friends come out of the woodwork and, I need this, I need guidance for that. Brilliant at being able to see everybody else's things. And I think being an empath makes it easier because I can feel what they're feeling. So it's easier to guide them. But with my feelings, very close to my chest, people that I'm dating only get to see it when I feel completely safe. And I never thought I was an enigma, but the older I've gotten, the more I've gotten to understand my chart and my human design and everything else about me. And I think also just life experience, I have realized that I think I'm being open, and I am, in the sense that I'm open to this person and open to what that can bring to my life and what this relationship could be. But until I'm safe with them, they don't get everything.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same way. And as far as extroversion and introversion, I think, right, that's the twins also, that we can go between them. But, when I was a child, I would say probably until I was maybe 6 or 7, I was extremely extroverted. And maybe even a little bit later, I just remember most of my childhood people telling me to be quiet, or my parents, that I was really irritating my parents. So apparently I felt really comfortable in the fourth house setting when I was a child. And I mean, I just heard it from so many people to sit still or to not make noises or to not be talking all the time, that eventually I became that really introverted person. So then in most of my school years, the people who I know, they would remember me as being really, really quiet in the classroom and shy. And then I think I had to come out of my shell again when I went to graduate school. But a lot of the Gemini energy, I feel, is, I know it's difficult for everyone, and I'm sure boys probably get it even more because they're always the ones that are targeted for being too loud in the classroom or whatever. But I feel like for women, it's hard to embody that curious, intellectual, but open and chatty and humorous energy, because a lot of times, you know, in many places, women are supposed to be the ones sitting quietly and not asking too many questions. I don't, what do you think?
Well, yes, I agree with you. I do wonder, do you think part of you being a little more extroverted, especially when you were younger, do you think that had anything to do with your Libra sun? And I ask that because I grew up with a Libra sister, and I don't actually know her chart,
Mm-hmm.
but she was a showwoman, to in a way that I cannot even describe. She was, I mean, one of my other sisters and I were talking the other night, and we were reminiscing about what the Libra was like to have as a sister. And you'd be sitting at the dinner table, and there would all of a sudden be an impromptu performance, and it would be a voice performance of something, or she would go and put a record on after dinner. And yes, I mean actual record, vinyl. We had this old sort of stereo system, but an incredible collection of records and CDs. And then what we wouldn't know is she'd gone and changed, and there was a full-blown performance going on to everything that was there. And I've always associated Libras with being very theatrical and on stage and sort of doing that. So I don't know, maybe you were getting it from
Interesting.
both sides, or maybe
Yeah.
she's got some Gemini in her chart and I
Well,
have
I was
no
gonna, I
idea.
mean, I'm a fifth house Libra because I'm a Gemini rising, and that is the extroverted show person, whatever, placement. And when I was comfortable, I definitely would be like that. I mean, when my friends came over, I'd love to talk to them now to see, what did you think when you came over? Because we were always putting on a show. We were always coming up with choreography.
Yeah.
And, but I felt like all kids did that. I don't know.
Yeah, and I can only talk about in my household, but the Libra sister, she just took it to a whole other level.
Yeah.
And yet we would get home from school, and her school uniform would come off, and again, a costume or something would come on, and we would just sit there and laugh for a solid hour before we all sort of dispersed to do our own things. Going back to the other thing you were saying about women sort of being expected to be quiet and all of that. There was someone, this is turning into the dating history of Natalie, but a friend of mine was getting married, and she wanted to set me up with somebody, and she sat us next to each other at the reception, and he comes up and says, I think this is a setup. And I said, I know it is. And he looked at me. I said, I had no part in it. I'm just aware of it being a setup. Anyway, he planned this wonderful date, and he was a Scorpio, and anyone that has been watching High Vibe for any amount of time knows that I love me a Scorp. And he planned this incredible date, and he designed roads. And I had so many questions when he told me all this. He was running the company, I think. And I said, so how do you know how many layers you have to put? Because I know there's rock and there's sand and there's this and there's that. And he's answering the questions. And then I was just peppering him with question after question after question, because the date he'd planned, we had to drive quite a distance to get to the location we were going. And he ended up looking at me and he said, you don't need to pretend you're interested. I said, I'm sorry. And he said, you don't need to pretend. And I said, no, I legitimately have all of these questions. And he goes, really? I said, yes. So then I asked him about the landscaping along the sides of the freeway. So I learned so much on that road trip. Anyway, we had this incredible date. At the end of it, neither of us were kind of ready for it to end. I had two concerns. He did drink a bit, and I'm not a huge drinker, and he was a smoker. But I was like, you never know. And he walks me to my door. We have a little kiss goodbye. And I walked away, and he even messaged me that night, I can't wait to see you again. Like, okay. And then I never heard from him. No problem. It's not a big deal, right? It was a nice date. I hear from my friend after the fact, and I had said to her, listen, just so you know, we went on a date. it clearly didn't work. It's good. Just don't push it because we're done. She's no problem. So she goes off and makes some phone calls. This man has gone off to some other friends and said, she is amazing. She's one of the most phenomenal women I've ever met. I'm like, thank you so much. However, I don't want to have to think when I get home.
Oh.
And they said, what? And he said, she's brilliant. She's curious and she's this and she's all the things, he didn't say the Gemini rising things, but all the Gemini rising things in terms of my mind, the fact that it doesn't switch off. And he said, I don't want that. And he ended up dating somebody else who, you know, she had a job that didn't require a whole lot of brain power. I don't want to say what it is because I don't want to put anybody down. It's not a reflection of her, but you know, that was it. And I've had people say, you need to just tone it down. And to my thinking, if somebody wants to date me, they have to accept me as I am. If I dumb it down, I'm going to become irritated and annoyed, and that doesn't work. However, I do get invited to a lot of dinner parties because people know that if everybody's awkward and doesn't speak, I will step in and get the conversation flowing.
Yeah. You know, so I wonder, it's really interesting that you had that experience because the thing is that I think because we ask so many questions, we're processing it. We really do care, and we don't talk all the time. I feel like also you really, I mean, that's Gemini rising's the personality. So that's how we are in public, but in private, then if you are the one who gets to be privileged enough to get to know our emotions and all of that, right? We understand people deeply. I feel like our Mercuries are in different placements too. So it doesn't mean we're constantly always chatting away. And we have different Venus placements. I think we both have our watery Venuses all as well. So I think that we understand things profoundly, and that's what people don't see on a superficial level. And so it does a disservice to women who are seen as more intellectual, engaged, asking too many questions, you know, that we ask questions so we understand the people so that we can be a better partner, or at least that might be my Libra coming out, right? That I want to know what makes people tick so that I can be there, because I guess I would believe a partner is someone who should be able to empathize with a person. And to me, I wouldn't be able to empathize if I don't understand. I don't know. But apparently that's off-putting to some people, right?
Well, yes. And my logic is, if it's off-putting to them, they're not my person. And there's nothing I can do, and I'm okay with that. The other thing is, I'm forever reading, and I'm making an assumption that you read quite a bit. Being a history professor, I assume that.
No, do you see it? I was thinking about this today, Natalie, about how you have the books behind you. I have stacks of books that I try to make nicer for when we go on the air, but how many books do you read at one time?
Well, back in the day, I only ever used to read one at a time. Now I have probably 5 on the go. And it depends, because some of them are very heavy in subject matter. And I hit a point where I went, I don't want to read that right before bed, because then it affects, not always, but it can affect me getting to sleep, and my brain, I struggle to switch it off. But I have not only this bookcase, I have 2 other bookcases that are all overflowing. And if I get myself another book, I'm going to have to start piles under my coffee table once again.
Yes.
But this is the whole thing. The mind literally never stops. And I think the other thing that people don't realize, and I'm assuming this is a Gemini rising or Gemini quality, and I could be wrong, but for me, I'm not fixed to an idea. If I believe something to be true and something to be fact, I'll stand on that hill and I'll die on it. But when I'm asking questions, as I learn more information, that can sway where I land. And sometimes people, you've changed. I have,
Mm-hmm.
because my curious little mind has gone off wandering and trying to learn as much as I can, whether it be from experts in their fields or from the books that I've been reading, whatever it is. And if there is evidence to the contrary of what I believe, I'm happy for my mind to be changed.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Right.
don't know if that's an air sign thing.
I think I don't know. It's coming as a Libra who has to weigh every side of the question. but you know, when I come to a conclusion, and I very rarely tell people what to do or assume I know something solidly, right? And sometimes I feel like as a professor, people don't want you to be that way. They want you to be the Sagittarius who's got it all figured out, and you have your elbow patches and you have your tweed jacket and your pipe and you know everything. I would be horrified to tell people I know everything, because I know if you're doing true science too, it's always changing because new evidence is always coming up. And I think as a Libra, I weigh all of the sides. Probably, maybe I do it a little too long. I don't know. But if I know something, I know it. I mean, you know what I mean? It's just like what you described. And I do think it's an air trait, but I'm sure but see, everybody's got air in their chart. Everybody has their placements in different places. So
Well, this
it's,
is true, but there are people that have, very earthy, for example, because I just keep thinking earth, sort of so grounded and
right.
entrenched. And honestly, I'm thinking my father, who's a Taurus, and I'm sure he's got either a stellium happening in Taurus, or there's a Taurus moon or something going on there, because he's so Taurian.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be more than just one thing, but he can be very fixed. And to try and have conversations with him and get him to a point of changing his mind, it's like trying to move an elephant that doesn't want to be moved.
That sounds fun.
I've never
But
used that vision before, but that's what I'm thinking of when trying to get my father to sort of change
mhm.
his mindset on something. Whereas for me, come at me with the proof and then we'll have a conversation.
Right. Yeah. That's why we have a really hard time. I think this is something else that we clicked on, is we have a hard time just accepting stories or accepting narratives, especially if there's obvious evidence that's not even hard to find. You don't have to dig very far to find it. So anyway.
No, I completely agree with that. And I chuckled because I was thinking of the last few years in the world. There were a lot of things that for me didn't make sense. And then you had a contingent of the population, and this isn't a debate any of us need to get into right now, but it was that moment of just you're being told what's what and you just have to go with it. And for me, I'm sitting there going, there are pieces of this puzzle that don't make sense. And the questions I was asking at that moment in time I wasn't trying to challenge it. I was just trying to see where those last pieces were. The problem becomes when the pieces don't fit, that's when you start going, hang on, there's something so off here. And then, we go down a whole nother thing. But again, I think that's that Gemini mind and the curiosity of needing it to make sense,
mm-hmm.
whatever it is.
Right. Right. And yeah, I liked also your story about the road man and how you were curious about how the roads were made, because I do that a lot too. And I will have to stop myself and think, yikes, this person's probably thinking, what is her problem? I mean, that's why I like David Palmer so much, because how many questions can you ask him? And he's so tolerant and he will answer the questions, and he understands that need to know. I really appreciate people who accept it. I feel like we're not rude. It's not as if you just run in. Now, there are some Geminis. So there are some extremely Gemini people out there in the world who embody that energy of going into a room and just like being driven and in their mode where they don't really see what's going on, and they might not be aware of the tone of the room maybe. So that's what one of the things I wanted to ask you for this show is, who are some of your favorite Gemini people or people who embody Gemini energy?
Do you know what?
What?
I don't know who's a Gemini off the top of my head, and I know it was something we were going to look at ahead of this,
You
but
didn't look at it?
I know, but in terms of curiosity, and I know he's a Leo, he's not a Gemini. I'd be curious as to whether he's got any Gemini in his chart. I love the way Joe Rogan asks questions, because to
Okay,
me,
yeah.
that's a very Gemini sort of minded thing. Who are yours? I'm going to Google and I'm going to tell you.
Well, before this, I was watching some videos and saw some people who have Gemini rising. One of them's Lady Gaga, which is interesting. Dr. Dre.
Do you know what's interesting about Lady Gaga? I'm sure she's an Aries.
Oh yeah, so see, you're okay. So you know who my celebrity twin is? If you're Lady Gaga, I'm Will Smith. He's a Libra with Gemini rising also.
Oh, is he really?
Mhm. Yeah, but I mean, I would say, well, of course, with the musical talent, that's a big Gemini thing. And I feel like I love music, but I'm not a musician. So, I can appreciate it, but that's not going to be me. I'm no Will Smith, but I feel like he comes off more as a Libra to me, a Libra man, which is different, I think. But I had mentioned to you one of the people who I always have. Well, actually, I have to say a couple of notorious Geminis first, or what really well known is Donald Trump. So that's one of the issues with how people perceive him. But he is actually a Gemini with a Leo rising, right? I think David's done that
I'm
before.
pretty sure they're.
And the other one who is the most Gemini person I've ever seen in person was Russell Brand when I went to his show.
Yeah.
And the instant he walked into the room, and it was like watching a computer that's aware of everything come into a room and just then start firing, just have all the energy and embody Gemini-ness that I was thinking, well, I'm a Libra for sure compared to him. But the other person who who I had mentioned to you that I always liked, and people don't always like her, is Heidi Klum.
Yeah.
Remember I mentioned how I was watching her on the Property Brothers?
Mm-hmm.
She did an episode where they were remodeling a house for her assistant, and she got in there and she was asking all these questions like, oh, like they're showing her how to do the roof, and she was genuinely interested and she wanted to do it, and she did the floor. And I was like, is she a Gemini? And then she just like moves constantly. So I looked up her chart. Yep. Gemini. I think she might be Leo rising too. I don't remember.
Well, so I've Googled a couple of things here. So I love that Marilyn Monroe was a Gemini.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you know what's really interesting? Of this list of famous Geminis that have come up, there's very few that I actually really like. So Heidi Klum is on there, obviously. Kanye West is on there, and I can see that because I think that he is probably a very curious mind. Angelina Jolie, Johnny Depp. See, it says Nicole Kidman, and I don't really see her as a Gemini, but
Nicole Kidman?
yeah.
She's a Gemini. I wonder what her rising sign is. She just strikes me as
she's
seems more
on the
Libra-ish.
cusp. She's June 20th. So
kind of Cancerish.
But yeah, so the Gemini risings that I Googled, Drew Barrymore is on there. And I mean, that makes sense with her having her talk show. I don't watch her talk show. I don't particularly love it. And I know that she comes under fire for the way she asks questions and the way she sort of oohs and ahs over certain people. But at the same time, it makes sense. I think there's probably a very genuine curiosity with her, and maybe it's just her delivery that people don't necessarily like. I know that not everybody likes me, so It is what it is. Sandra Bullock is Gemini rising. Amy Winehouse was. I like you. So I say I have musicality because I can dance, and I can dance really well. If I was to sing for anyone, it's like a cat being strangled. It's so bad. It's so bad. I did not inherit that quality
Yeah.
as a Gemini rising, to the point I was in a Bollywood film. I've told you that I was in a Bollywood film. I don't remember. Did I send you the link?
You sent me this. Yes, you sent it to me.
So in this Bollywood film that filmed in Australia, we had to, in the audition, we had to sort of dance, and there was a little thing we had to do. And so I did it. I was so young. And they said, you'll be miming to a song. And they gave us the line of the song, and that's all great. On the day of shooting, so we were shooting for 2 days. One day was down in Phillip Island in Victoria, and then the other day we were filming was right in the center of Melbourne. And so on the second day of filming, we're sitting around, we're waiting, because they were cast and crew were having breakfast, and the producer, the director, comes over and he says, okay, girls, while we're waiting, I want you to sing the line of the song. And I looked at him and went, no. And he goes, no, I need to know that you've got the timing right, so you'll be able to mime it at the correct tempo. And I looked at him, I went, you do not want me to sing this for you. I said, can you just play the song? I will mime it. I promise you I've got this right. He goes, you are going to sing this. I sang it for him. The girls that I'm sitting with are doing this. And the director looks at me, and this is a very, very, very famous Bollywood director. There were people who were from India that were sort of standing around watching us film. And because we had been giving the director lip, they called us over and said, do you understand who you're speaking to? He's seen as a bit of a god. And this man looks at me and just says, don't you ever sing in front of me again. And I said, that's fine. I didn't want to sing in front of you the first time.
Yeah, you told him, you warned him.
Yeah. So the other Gemini risings that popped up, which I found interesting, Juliette Lewis, Michelle Pfeiffer, Sarah Jessica Parker. You talked about Will Smith. Mick Jagger is one. There's a few names here that I don't even know. Matthew McConaughey doesn't surprise me at all. I actually find that really interesting.
He might be your ideal man. It's Scorpio with Gemini rising.
Oh, is he a Scorp?
Mm-hmm.
I feel he hasn't aged that well. You know, he's
aged like a man. Well, but I mean, it seems like he's done a little bit to his face. I don't know.
I don't know what it is. He doesn't do it for me. Actually, there's two others that I will bring up, Kristen Stewart and Pamela Anderson. So what's Pamela Anderson's sign?
Is she a Cancer? I don't know. Someone will know. But
so the Kristen Stewart thing, there was a woman that I knew in Melbourne. She got flown out to Cannes Film Festival for something, and she was flown out for free, but you have to work. Possibly, but you may not need to work. It was this whole weird sort of thing. But she was like, I get a free trip to Cannes. I was like, go. So when she came back, I said, how was it? And she said, oh, I worked for two celebrities while I was there. And one was Blake Lively and the other one was Kristen Stewart. And I said, oh, I think Blake Lively is beautiful. She goes, oh, the most boring person you'll ever meet. I went, oh. Didn't expect that. And then I said, and Kristen Stewart, I said, she's never done anything for me. I feel like she always just looks like she's snarling and miserable. And this woman said she is one of the most charismatic people I have ever met in my life. And I found that really interesting. And so seeing that she's a Gemini rising, I wonder if that's that duality of nature, but instead of putting that sort of charismatic part of herself forward, instead it's the more reserved side because she feels a little bit uncomfortable, and instead keeps that other part, I don't know, for those that are a bit closer to her. That was just a weird little thing.
Well, I mean, Gemini energy, it's the twins, so we have both sides, right? I mean, and another thing, I've been sitting here trying to picture everyone in my mind because they say Gemini risings, there's always something with the eyes. What else?
Well,
I know what you're thinking about, the AI. See, I knew you were a Gemini rising, or maybe you weren't thinking about that.
Well, I wasn't, but I will say that. But you were 100% spot on about Pamela Anderson, July 1st, full Cancer, which makes sense with her relationship wise.
Yeah, she's had so much trauma.
But the thing with the AI is correct. And not that anybody else knows what I'm saying. I can always tell when an image is AI generated because the eyes are dead. It's this weird thing. And I don't understand how these pages that have these AI generated models and personalities, because they're not personalities, but they have millions of followers. And I look at it and go, okay, I get it that it's technically the perfect woman or the perfect man, but you look and you can see there's no soul.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's not a thing for everybody.
Well, maybe they're not Gemini rising, so it doesn't matter. I don't know. But DJ Dre says here, Prince and Tupac are also Gemini sons. And I mean, honestly, I feel like Geminis, like true Geminis, are some of the most brilliant people and musically talented. And they can be geniuses, right? Of course, I mean, we just look like geniuses, and then we turn into the Libras and Aries in person.
Well, I'm certainly not the musical genius we've established.
No. And I mean, my highlight for music was in the third grade talent show, or not talent show. It was the third grade winter concert. We sang a Christmas carol back in the days when they still allowed you to do that in public school. And it was "O Come All Ye Faithful," I think. And here I am just like, oh, this is so fun. We get to be doing this. This is great. I can sing in the chorus, but nobody would come in first, right? Like everybody was so shy. And so the teacher told me, okay, so you get to be the one who comes in first, and then everybody will come in. And I was so excited about it. But when it got to the performance, everybody else was so loud, and I was like, they took my job. So that was my big, that. But I loved dance classes too. But yeah, music wasn't my forte, unfortunately.
Well, I don't understand when I became tone deaf, because here's the thing. In third grade, we were meant to do a performance of Samson and Delilah. And we all had to audition, and I auditioned. I became the understudy for Delilah.
What? Why am I'm not having trouble believing that, but go on.
Well,
in third grade.
I have trouble believing it because I don't understand. And then many years ago, it was probably when I was moving house at one point, I was reading some of my old report cards, and the teacher talked about that I was a good singer, but a little flat. And it's gone from that to seriously a cat being strangled. So I don't understand where I lost it, but I had it briefly. And then the universe went, no, maybe they said you're too talented in other areas. Yes. You can't do it all. So we're just going to take it away from you.
Yeah, you can't do everything, unfortunately, even with your Gemini rising, the jack of all trades. Yeah. So would you say, I was looking at my list, are you childlike?
Apparently I can be. But again, I base a lot of this on the people close to me and the feedback they give me, because I think I'm just me. I don't think I'm that weird. I don't think I'm that different. And then the people around me go, you're a complete weirdo. I know I'm awkward. That part I know, because I get myself into situations where it's so ridiculously awkward, and that's it. But I think it was the day I had wanted to go to a particular concert, and I was told, we're not going. I went, okay. And then we were driving to a dinner, and I was informed that we had tickets, and I got so excited. I forgot to tell them where the restaurant was, and we completely missed it, and we had to drive around because I was in the seat clapping like a child. and going nuts. And they said to me, when you're happy, you can become very childlike. And so
Mhm.
I don't think I'm childish. I think I embrace the joy of certain things the way a child would.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah,
taking my shoes off and running through a field and just
yeah,
being
I
so
love
happy and
that.
lost
I
in all
I
of that sort of stuff.
life is too short not to do that. I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're not taking things seriously. And I feel like in the academic world where I spend some of my time, people equate intelligence with seriousness. And I mean, I guess that's not the right word. Stoicism, just sort of, you don't joke, you don't
Or
laugh.
being conservative. Do you think that's I think it's a collection of words that people probably
Yeah,
need to
right.
associate with academia, but yeah.
Mhm. And for the longest time, I always tried to moderate my lectures and be really serious and get my glasses on. Remember, we got to look smart. Apparently, Gemini Risings don't need glasses to look smart, according to somebody who I watched on YouTube. But we thought we might get our glasses out for part of this. But so for a while, I would do what came unnaturally to me because I'd get teaching evaluations where they'd say, like, I'll never forget one, and this is so Gemini Rising. It was that Anne could be more of the sage on the stage, which is the know-it-all Sagittarius in front of people. And I always love to teach more through conversations and like exploring documents, doing more hands-on work of actually doing the work, because to me, I feel like you learn more through exploration. And I think that's why we probably end up asking questions but then wanting to talk through issues. Do you learn well, Natalie? Have you ever learned well by just taking notes or listening and taking notes in classrooms?
No, well, what I was going to say, I wanted you to finish, so I didn't want to cut you off. I
Mhm.
also think for a lot of people, they learn better when there's interaction or it's interesting. So some of my best teachers that I ever had were funny. Do
Mhm.
you know what I mean? There was personality while they were teaching me. So I'm not someone that learns well from, you know how some people can sit down and just read a book and that's it.
Yeah.
I do better one-on-one, and I've had people go, I'll tell you what to do and then you go forth and do whatever it is. I'm like, no, I need you to show me and I need to learn and I need to be hands-on, or
Mhm.
I need someone engaging to teach me. So if it's a lecture, if they're engaging, I will sit there and listen to the entire thing. But so I left school when I was in 10th grade. I'd been begging my parents, please let me change schools, which they wouldn't let me do. And so I just stopped going. And halfway
Mhm.
through year 10, I went, I'm out. I'm not going back. And my parents were mortified, convinced I would never make anything of myself. And the reality was I just needed to get out of that environment. And so the very next year, my mum said, well, you can go back and you can do just a couple of subjects at a TAFE, which I guess is the equivalent to a community college over here in the US. And I started going, and after 4 weeks, I stopped. And mum said, you've got to go, because I was so scared I wouldn't get an education. And I said to her, for 4 hours on a Monday and a Tuesday night, I have people standing in front of me talking like this. There was no intonation in their voice. There was no energy. There was no enthusiasm. And I said, I can't. I want to stick hot pokers in my ears. I cannot sit there. And I ended up leaving. And then the very next year I went back and actually started the next 2 years of my schooling at a different school. But yeah, I need that engagement. So this whole belief that academia needs to be so stiff, I think is completely wrong. I think there are a
Right.
lot of people that need that sort of engagement. So, and I'm
Yeah.
always in awe when you're talking about history because of how you deliver it.
Well,
I know I haven't been to a class, but I've been present
I
for
just
enough.
talk about what I find interesting. And I mean, I do think that there is a place for an academic presentation style, but even then, some people will just read a paper with a monotone, like you said, and I've never been able to do that. And but then, I mean, I've come into who I am, and just I can't be anything besides that, right? So that we all have to embody whoever we are, because that's what we were born to be like. That's why we all have these different charts. And I feel like it's up to the institutions to be more flexible, because we can see that schools, the way that they teach kids, they haven't changed since the 19th century. And I mean, they've changed little bits here and there, but it's still go to school during this industrial time frame. You wake up at a certain time when nobody wants to wake up, when you're a teenager, for sure. You go in, you do this class and this class, like it's, and that's the public education system. It should be where you can learn the way it works best for you, unless the goal is to make people not ask questions. And we could get into that, you know?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I feel like schooling has actually changed for the worse over the last 15, 20 years. At least when I went to school, I'm sounding like an old woman now, but when I went to school, though, it was still about asking questions. What can you do? How can you become an entrepreneur, and all these sorts of things. And while maybe it wasn't the biggest push compared to now, where children are put in a classroom, and there are plenty of experts that come out and say, if a child isn't learning, you shouldn't be asking what's wrong with the child. You should be saying, well, how do they learn best? And making those adjustments accordingly. And I don't think any of that happens. And I think at the moment, children are being taught to obey, to live within a certain box, and that's what you're meant to do. And so these kids come out just repeating things. They're not taught to question. The whole Gemini part of people is being completely shut down. Don't ask questions. Don't do anything. Just repeat these facts. Whether they're facts or not is a whole separate question. And you learn to get up at this time, go to bed at this time, and that's just it. And I don't think that's how life needs to be. And I don't think that's how school needs to be either.
No, it shouldn't, right? You don't get to the Sagittarius without the Gemini. It's the same axis. You have to ask the questions. You need to compile the data, and then you craft the story and the belief system, and whatever you teach, right? But I don't know. It was really the hardest thing. Someone just mentioned in the chat, Liz, that her daughter's about ready to start kindergarten. And that is so stressful when you're trying to figure out where's the best place to nurture your child's mind, right? Part of the issue is, where can they be safe and feel welcome and all of those things? But then where are they going to have their minds nurtured? Where will they be respected and appreciated for who they are, and not try to drive them into this robotic nature? It's just so stressful to try to figure out what to do with your kids. It really is, because then you sit there and you feel like you're going to ruin them, for the rest of their lives. And it's so much pressure.
I do think that sorry, what were you saying?
What was I saying?
Oh, no. Do you know what it was? I was bringing up the chat so that I can have it on the screen as opposed to looking to my side. And I think it was your voice coming through the thing. And I'm like, oh, she wanted to, I cut her off. I think the last few years, once again, has changed how parents approach schooling. And I've watched a lot of my friends go through taking their kids out of a regular school and doing things completely differently. And it's something that seems to be working for the better. I mean, in the last 4 years, there have been all these community schools that have sort of popped up out of nowhere. And the subjects that are being taught are, home economics is making a comeback, and they're teaching kids about how to live in the world. And a friend So one of my friends, her son is 12, and they did this exercise at school where they were, all right, you've got this job, this is how much you're earning, you've got to go out and pay rent and pay your bills and do all this. And so they did this huge exercise, and the kids really had to think and budget. And her 12-year-old gets in the car and says, it's been a stressful day. And she said, well, why? He goes, well, after paying rent and after doing this, I only had this much money left. How am I going to feed myself? And I think there's so much real world stuff that doesn't get taught anymore. And I think as tough as the last few years have been, and as awful as I imagine it to be for parents right now having to make all these decisions, I think there's a lot that's opened up in the world that is going to create a better environment for them and their children in terms of schooling. But you have to look for it. I mean, that's the tough part.
Right. And everybody's not so fortunate to be able to go from one school to the next, and you kind of get stuck with your public school, or if you want to homeschool but you can't.
Yeah.
But anyway, those are all things we'll have to explore in another episode. We need to bring someone on who talks about that.
I do want to say one thing though. People need to remember, even if your child has to go to a traditional school, and if you don't love what they're being taught, if you give them a solid spiritual, whatever that means to you, I'm not saying it has to be one thing, whether it be organized religion, spirituality in the sense that we talk about here on the show, or something else. But if you give them a good grounding and you give them a solid understanding of life, and you're giving them a real world education, your child will be fine. There's an interview that I did a couple of months ago with Lee Dundas, and she talks about her daughter and the schooling and the fact that she is now at a very liberal university, and this girl holds her ground, stands by her beliefs, is not being influenced one way or the other by the school. She's learning what she needs to learn, but that's it. And I think that all comes back to the home that you create for your child.
Right. Yeah, I think so. And allowing them to feel as if their perspective matters, right? And that they have a voice. I think that that's probably something Gemini energy understands, is the curiosity of a child and appreciating it. That curious element has really kind of been drummed out of like recent students. And I feel that some of it is just kind of trying to find their way back after such a difficult past few years and not really feeling as if you have a voice. But that's, this is one of the reasons that when a lot of people, it's pretty common for people to kind of do generation bashing in public, right? Whether it's up or down. And I mean, I'm guilty of doing that, right? But I feel like it's really important to understand the younger generation, especially, and to encourage them to be able to use their voice, even if we feel like we don't agree, right? That you have to allow people to start asking questions and giving them the space to do it before they see where they're not making sense, right? If we feel like it doesn't make sense, or maybe we'll learn something in the process of letting them do that.
And I also think there is one of the most important lessons is teaching your children to be confident enough in what they know and what they believe. I mean, yes, you have to be open to new ideas and new possibilities, because we're all wrong at some point in life. We just are. And I mean, my political beliefs have shifted over the years, and what I thought was one way, I don't see it that way anymore. And that's because of the information that's come in. So you have to be open to things, but at the same time, there is an element of being brave to stand up for what you believe in. And I get it. If you're in a place where if you speak up, they're going to pile on top of you. And so there are a lot of people who generally are more conservative if they speak up when they're in a very liberal sort of environment. These kids go to the classes, the lectures, and they listen to it, and they don't speak up. And I hate that this is a world we live in, because to me, we should be in a world where we can have a debate and understand, be able to hear the other side, even if we don't agree with it, and be able to have that back and forth. But I think to instill in your child that they don't need to change their opinions because there's pressure on them, just to be able to hold their ground and go, this is what I think. And it's fine for you to be there. And
right. Yeah. It's, I always try to encourage people to have different perspectives in my classrooms, but it's not always easy, right? And then you get to the point where you wonder, are there even other perspectives anymore? Are there different views? But anyway, see, we just got into the serious point.
I know we completely diverted, but I just, with Liz talking about putting kids in school, I feel like it was such an important topic to hit on before we kind of moved on. So I'm just checking my notes to see if there's anything else that we had really wanted to touch on. So in your reading of everything before we did this show, are there any other points that you had wanted to bring up or discuss in terms of being Gemini rising?
I feel like, I mean, we talked about a lot of them, and one of the big ones that a lot of people will accuse Gemini risings and Geminis of doing is dropping things, right? Not finishing things. That we're good at multitasking and that we get bored easily, right? These are some of the good and bad things, I guess. But I don't know. Do you feel like that resonates? I definitely multitask, and I love to do many different things, and I don't always finish everything. But if it's important, it gets done. I don't ever not finish tasks.
So I'm the queen of procrastination, and I put it down to a few things. So the Gemini rising part is absolutely there. But then as an Aries, I want to be the leader, and I'm going to show you the way, and this is how we're doing it. And so the Aries doesn't always want to finish things. And then I'm a manifestor in human design. Same thing. I come up with a brilliant idea, but I don't want to do the work.
That's what I'm for.
Right?
I will generate it for you.
Generators need to go off and do that. So I feel like that whole thing of not finishing, I've got the triple whammy with that. But same thing. If something's important, I'll always finish it. There are other things that I pick up and go, and I look at it and go, okay, is this something I need to finish? Not so much. And then I'll move on. The multitasking, absolutely. I'm always doing 500 things at once.
Me too. Where I've gotten to the point though, where I think having kids helps too, because you have to just get in the moment, or even having too many obligations, like having, looking at the dogs right now because one of them's coming over and he probably needs to go out. It's just sort of like with all these different things, sometimes you have to slow down and just be present. And I feel like Gemini energy can get up into the stratosphere, right? And we need to be grounded too. And so I try to pull myself down and make space and do all sorts of techniques just to get into the moment.
I sometimes have to ground and just breathe and go, okay, this task sucks. So anything tax, and I know most people hate tax, but there are people that love it. I go see my accountant and he's just, this is great. And I'm looking at him going, do you know how much my brain hurts because I've just had to deal with all of this and get everything ready for you? And he looks at me, he's like, really? He goes, this is so much fun. My father's that way. I'm not that way inclined, but all the important things, I need deadlines, and whether they're self-imposed deadlines, but I'll leave the things that I don't want to finish, I'll leave right up until that deadline.
Right.
And then I'll get it done. And in the meantime, I'll do 30 different things because the multitasking part of me is like, I can do all this, to the point that there are moments where if I get a phone call or something, I have to actively stop doing things because I'll get distracted because I'm on the phone and doing 3 other things at once. So that's when I make your blanket, Anne. So
I'm so excited about that. I'm so
glad
you're a good multitasker.
I know. So nobody knows what we're talking about.
No.
I crochet, and I have crocheted since I was a kid. I've knitted, I've crocheted. I can't do anything. So my knitting experience is making scarves. And I have gone out many times and sort of said to someone, do you like my scarf? And they say, sure. And I go, I made it myself. And they're like, okay. All I can do. And I make blankets because that's all I know how to crochet. And I only know how to crochet in one style. I want to learn some different things. But I told Anne, and Anne said, I would love a blanket. And I think 5 hours later, I had bought all the yarn.
Before I even had a chance, you're sending me pictures. She's already at Michael's or Joann's with a cart, an entire cart full of yarn. And it was every beautiful color. And I'm like, oh, this is so beautiful. Every color, I get every color. So like my Libra was happy. I didn't have to decide. And they were all beautiful colors. I love it. And she sends me pictures every so often of it. But we better be quiet or you'll have orders coming in.
Right. So, but the beautiful thing about the blanket is, as opposed to getting distracted by my phone or anything like that, when I get a phone call now, I sit and I pick up the blanket because it keeps my hands busy. And I never speak with the phone to my ear because I've only got the cell phone. So it's always headphones and wired headphones. And so that is what stops me from not paying attention to who I'm on the phone to. So your blanket is saving me.
Oh, maybe I need to do something like that. But I feel like I'm pretty good at paying attention to the people on the phone, but I always have such long conversations and deep conversations. Do you do that too?
That's why your blanket's so big. So
I'm going to get the room-sized carpet, right?
Well, I do keep going. So what I discovered was the yarn that I bought, most of the balls were £1, which I didn't realize. And every time I do another round, I think, okay, I'm probably only going to get 1 or 2 more sort of goes around with this. It's the never-ending yarn. So I may hit a point where I go, I just have to stop. So the other thing that I do, I always have a pile of whatever oracle cards or tarot cards I'm working with at the time. They sit on the arm of my couch as well. So the other thing I do, people will always hear shuffling in the background. If I'm not crocheting, they'll just hear cards. And sometimes if it's the long, deep conversations, people will go, you've pulled cards. And I'm like, yep. And generally they're a confirmation of what I've already told them. But so those are my things. And when I say distracted, if I'm on the phone, if I'm doing something like cleaning or cooking, it's fine. But it's when I start flicking through my phone. So if I check Twitter or Instagram, because then sometimes my mind is reading, so I'm not listening.
Yes. I mean, that's one thing I think probably Gemini energy could get addicted to, would be scrolling through phones and social media, because TikTok, because it's just constantly sending you new stuff. And that's why the first time I watched TikTok, I was like, no, you can never have this, kids, because you can see how the algorithm works. You see how it's trying to keep you addicted, and everybody does the same thing now, right? But and I have to put it down because I just feel myself like you can feel yourself ahead of yourself, not in your body. And I'm just like, put it down.
And it's ruining the attention span of people. And can I just say, I find Facebook and Instagram so painful and boring now anyway. All I see is posts you might like. I'm not interested in any of that. I'm on there because I want to see the people that I'm connected to or the people that I choose to follow. Twitter I find interesting. I get a lot off Twitter, but there are days where I need a break from all of that. And TikTok, I get quite a lot from as well. But I do find there are days where I'm flicking through it and going, okay, this is so bad for my brain. I swear to God, I can feel my brain dying or a part of it. And that's where I put it down. Go pick up a book and get into that. But this is why long form content struggles for a lot of people, because people, especially the younger generation, struggle to focus on something for more than 3 minutes at a time, which makes me so sad.
Right. But I think there are a lot of kids now who are getting more in depth about things that have nothing to do with social media and really getting into hobbies. And I think there's a little bit of a backlash brewing, but I might be wrong. But you know what you mentioned is you don't want to see the things suggested for you, right? And I wonder if, okay, is this another Gemini thing? Because, for example, when I look at Apple Music and what it's suggesting for me, I get so mad. I'm like, I listened to that once and you're giving me this entire thing. Like my music, I want it to be absolutely different. Like I want classical. I don't want a lot of country. I'm sorry. But there's certain music that I don't love as much, but I want it to be everything. I love all music, right? And so those attempts to boil me down, that would be the thing I fear about an AI universe, would be that it's trying to shape me into some boring thing that I will hate. What do you think?
I completely agree with that. So another fun fact about me, I actually quite like country music. And
that's right. You like that new Beyonce song.
I am obsessed with the new Beyonce song, and I hate myself for it because I don't love Beyonce. And I've seen a video clip of another country song that she's done. I think it's on the album, and I went, but this new one, it gets me somewhere, but I am getting sick of watching all these dances on TikTok from it. But so I can't stand heavy metal and death metal. Those are the things that I absolutely cannot listen to. Everything else I can, and super heavy jazz where people are scatting and all of that. But
I love those because they're so
scatting,
different. I like scatting. Well, I mean, to some extent. I love metal. I love all the music David plays. He's got a great.
Oh my God, when he plays the heavy metal, I struggle so hard.
But you're the Aries and I'm the Libra, so this should be swapped, I think.
I know, but it gives me anxiety. I physically feel it in my body. I feel everything go, but give me some good country music. And I'm like, yeah.
And I'm like, that's funny.
My girlfriend that I was just in New Orleans with, she feels the same way. And I said to her, I think of you now every time I play country, because we had a conversation about it and we were sending each other voice messages, and she said she was in the car with her kids and a country song came on, but she was driving. She just let it play. And apparently one of the kids said, Mom, what's wrong with your face? And she was having a visceral reaction to the country music. And she said, I sort of snarled or did something. And so she said, that is how strongly I feel. And so when we're in New Orleans, I said, have you heard the new Beyonce song? Maybe that'll, change it a little bit. And I played it and we were, I don't know, 30 seconds in, and she looks at me, she says, no. I said, okay, it's fine. I turned it off. We did not discuss it again.
Yeah, when you sent that to me, because you're the one who sent it to me, I hadn't even heard it. And you said you're loving it. And I said, I feel like Beyonce's switching with Taylor Swift, and Taylor Swift's trying to become Beyonce. It's very strange.
But I am convinced, because I'm also obsessed with horses, I'm convinced I'm going to meet me a cowboy and we're going to ride off into the sunset together. And I'm going to end up in a bar boot scooting or doing something.
Well, see, I mean, the country line dancing, I think that would be fun. Line dancing just for like a couple of songs. But I only listen to country music. What would you call it? Ironically, sarcastic. I mean, because on Sirius XM, there was this station, or might still be there, I don't know, called Red, White, and Booze. Oh, really? That turned out to be the only station we could all listen to together on a car trip, where everybody, but it mixed in classic rock and things too. But I can listen to, I like Johnny Cash, if that counts as country.
I think so. Do you know the Johnny Cash Museum in Nashville, Tennessee, one of the best museums I've ever been to?
I've heard that.
It's a really good museum. And mind you, on that same trip, we later went to Cleveland, Ohio, and we were at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I did not enjoy that. I didn't enjoy the way it was set out, and other people may feel differently, but the Johnny Cash Museum I thought was fantastic. And in my stories highlights with one of the trips with my dad, I think it was from 20, maybe it was 20, it must have been 2018. There's Dad and I rocking out in one of the rooms to Johnny Cash. Good time.
Were you singing?
No, I was not. I was just bopping away because my dad was, I was trying to get my dad dancing because when he dances, it gets the shoulders going and he's super cute. And I get my singing voice from him. He was kicked out of the choir in the 3rd grade by the nuns. They heard something off, and so they started going through child by child until they found my father and went out. And my father enjoyed singing. I enjoy singing. So when I was learning how to drive, we sang together terribly. It was magical.
I saw one of your videos of singing Sister Suffragette, which I loved because I love Mary Poppins. So apparently Mary Poppins is one of Natalie's inspirational films, right?
Well,
and you thought of it when you were at some suffrage memorial, or?
Yeah, so that was in Tennessee. That was the same trip. And we get there and there's this statue for the suffragettes. And so I burst into song. So the post that exists on YouTube, on Instagram of that, I had sung the entire song. Like nobody wanted it. Nobody at all wanted to hear that, but I decided to stand in front of them and march and sing the song. And my sister caught the very end of it, and you can hear my father in the background going, "Do you know her?" Forever trying to disown me.
Oh, funny. I have to say, I've got to point out the great joke in the chat from Jensen, the new next. That museum, your museum you went to, doesn't take credit cards, only cash.
Hang on,
Johnny Cash Museum.
Oh, that's actually pretty good. I don't know if it's a Laura Lynn. There's another museum that's attached to it, and I didn't go to that one, so I don't know if that one was any good. We just did Johnny Cash, but
is it June Carter Cash?
I don't think it was June's. No, it was somebody else. I don't recall who it was, but it was yeah, I don't know. Solid Behind Blue Eyes is saying, I'm hated on road trips for singing loudly. Hey, you know what though? Singing is a form of joy. That's how I see it.
So do I. Everybody sings on road trips.
I have a friend that says to me, you are not, he hates road trips and we haven't done one. I always threaten him with one, but sometimes when we're in the car, I just lose myself and he goes, no. But he works in entertainment and he makes music himself. So hearing someone sound like they're being murdered, it offends his ears, and I understand.
How is he your friend?
Do you know what? He's a Libra as well.
He's giving Libras a bad name.
No, but do you know what? We often talk about our personalities because he can go really dark. And I always go, I'll go to the dark places with somebody, but he goes really dark. And there are days where I sort of sit there and go, all right, it's time to get out. You've got to climb out of it, suck it up and just move on with life. Meanwhile, he looks at me and goes, you are so annoyingly positive. Yes, I am. It's like we're the yin and yang to each other.
Well, that's kind of fun.
Yeah, he kind of brings me down at times and speaks sense when I'm off floating away in my Gemini.
It's your Gemini moon, especially, I think, that really it's one of the things I was going to mention when we first started, you said a story about the guy who told you never stop talking, right? And I think they've written a song about that. But I toured around Europe with a really good friend of mine from college, right after college, or no, I guess between our junior and senior year, we went on a trip to all around Europe. And she and I could we would just sit and talk and talk and talk, nonstop talking constantly. And it got to the point where it was like, okay, it's time to be quiet now. And we both are also introverted people at times.
Yeah.
But I just got to the point where I was like, okay, we just need quiet. And so we'd have quiet. But we also started to do this thing where we were like, okay, it's my turn to talk because one of us could just start going and the other one's like, do I get to say anything? But so we would just start saying, oh, now it's my turn to talk, because we were at Cambridge University in England. So we were doing our best British manners, politeness, and, taking turns. So we still will do that sometimes. But I found out recently that she's a Gemini moon. So I feel like air moons can really just talk and talk and have the best times too.
Well, my girlfriend, so while you were talking, I went, I've got to look up my girlfriend's birthday, the one that I was just in New Orleans with.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't speak to anybody else the entire time we were on that trip. She was exchanging messages with her husband and children. I was exchanging messages with a couple of people in my life, but we were just together. And from the second we got up, we would sort of, in the mornings, it was like, hey, there was a little bit of chit chat. We would get ready. But from the moment we sort of left the apartment, we did not stop speaking. And very much like you and I speak, in that we go and then we go off in 5 different directions and we come back to the original point, and we never lost track of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we came back at night after dinner, we would sort of go, okay, good night, I'll see you in the morning. And then we would go, and that was our quiet time. And so I've just looked up her birthday. So she's an Aries. But the way the conversation sort of played out, it was very Gemini. I'm going to have to ask her for a birth time so I can run her chart, because I wouldn't be surprised. Man, if she comes back as a Gemini rising, I'm going to laugh so hard.
She'll definitely have to be a guest then on our show.
Oh,
right?
She's going to be. And I also wonder if she's got a lot of Pisces, because she's a light worker like I've never met before, to the point that I was making her tell me things about certain things. But in the end I said, sorry, am I like a person with a animal at a circus and I'm poking you going, do your trick, do your trick, do your trick? Because I kept giving her.
Then she's a perfect guest for this show.
I was giving her photos of people, because she can read people incredibly. So I'm like, look at this person, look at this person. And I wouldn't tell her who they were to me. I'm just like, look at this one, look at this one. And then I'd tell her the stories.
See, now I would love to do that with historic people. Wouldn't that be amazing? I could give her the people I'm working on and say, tell me about this person's inner life.
Would be really fun.
Yeah. And by the way, Natalie, just to be random and Gemini rising, Juliet, my cat, is scratching on the door trying to get in. She hears your voice.
I feel like you have to let her in.
Well, she can wait.
I'm
just being a ruthless Libra now. So
to anyone watching, every time Anne and I speak, Juliet is in the background singing the song of her people or joining in our conversation. And I am so obsessed with it. I love Juliet. I love that she wants to talk all the time.
And she's trying to get you to sing too. See, Juliet appreciates it. I was going to say, should we start our questions? Because I feel like maybe we will never get through them.
What I was about to do. So do you have them in front of you, or do you just want me to put them?
I don't have them in front of me.
Okay. So for anyone that didn't catch the first episode, we have 4 questions that we are going to end every single show with every guest, because I think these things are really interesting. And because this show has been all about getting to know Anne and I, and why we called it Gemini Rising, and just getting to know us a little bit better, and I think differently from how people have gotten to know us on High Vibe and through the other work that we do, that we would also answer these 4 questions for you so that you guys have a better sense of who we are. So, Anne, what makes you laugh?
What makes me laugh would probably be, I really can't say anything. Everything makes me laugh. I think it's not, I don't have a particular type of humor. But I will, what I'll say, that what makes me laugh that is always unexpected to people is sort of physical humor, like Charlie Chaplin or the great silent film actors who did that, but Buster Keaton, or even watching I Love Lucy, like Lucille Ball. There's something about that, the physical humor of somebody being able to pull it off, and then things happening where you can it's probably the Gemini mind of to see like chain reactions and how they're interacting with things going out of control. I think I that's probably what makes me laugh the most. And it'll be where I'm cracking up and nobody else is. But on the other hand, it would be like, Quentin Tarantino's movie, On the Manson Family. What is that one called?
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yes. At the end of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, in that scene with Brad Pitt and the flamethrower thing, and like Charlie Manson comes in to try to murder them, and what happens? My brother and I, like, we share a sense of humor, and I don't know whether he has Gemini in his chart. Things like that, because it also involved Charles Manson. But it was so funny how Quentin Tarantino turned it and made you get this like alternate ending that you wish would have happened. We were cracking up, and the people in the theater, we watched it like here in Orange County, they were just like looking at us like, what are you people? Like, why do you think this is funny? We're cracking up with the flamethrower. Did you see the film? I don't want to say too much if people haven't seen it, but
no, so I did. I saw that with my dad. He was in town. I think he'd come on his own, and it was just a 2-week trip, and I was running out of things to do with him. So I took him to a theater in Pacific Palisades because it had the recliners and we could order food and all that. And so here's the thing with me. I have a really dark sense of humor, and I will laugh at inappropriate things that people will sometimes find offensive, and I just think it's hilarious. But I struggled with that scene because it was so violent. I watched sort of the beginning of it, and I hit a point where I sort of started doing this. My dad giggling like a little kid.
Your dad thought it was funny?
My dad thought it was
Wow.
hilarious. He hated that movie, but he loved the ending. And I'm sitting there listening to him giggling away, and I was like, okay, this is it. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And then I think he found it funny that I was sitting like this, sort of half watching, but at certain moments I had to just shut my eyes, which is weird for me. So for me, I think many things make me laugh, and I enjoy physical humor, all of that sort of stuff. But I think my animals are what make me laugh. So I realized after I lost Bumble that we laughed every day. And I say we, and I know people go, you're humanizing this dog. That dog, he would do things and then look at me, and I swear to God, he would have a grin on his face, and he'd give me a look as if to go, that was funny. Because he would do things when we would go on a walk where because he was a living, breathing puddle and always wanted to be on the ground asleep, when I would train him, he would fall asleep in the middle of training. And the trainers even said, we've never seen this in a dog before. And he would and I'd say he's going down. So when we were training in my apartment, we would have to run from spot to spot to try and keep him upright. And so for his entire life, when we went walking, I'd have a bag of hot dog, like a fanny pack of hot dog. And he knew when I had the bag and when I didn't. And so if I didn't have the bag, he would behave perfectly. If I had the bag, it meant while we were out and doing our big walk, we would do these training drills and things just to keep everything fresh and what have you. But he knew he had to walk past all other dogs, not try and play, not be silly or whatever. And occasionally he would just play bow and bark at a dog, and he had a big bark on him, and it would scare the living crap out of the little dogs and the owners. And we would go walking off, and he'd be like, that was funny, give me the sausage. And I'd be like,
he was amusing you.
And he would, for 5 minutes, because I often would speak to people while I was walking him, he'd be giving me that look like, give it to me. I'd be like, no. And we'd have this argument, or I would have an argument. He'd be giving me the look. And I swear to God, he would look at me as if to say it was worth it. But we would just laugh from sun up to sundown. I would get up and I'd open the blinds before I took him out to pee. And he would, the very last video at the moment that's posted on his YouTube page is him running in amongst these horrible vertical blinds that I have. And he would give me that look like, it's funny. I'm probably not doing a very good job of explaining it, but
no, that's perfect.
I tend to pick these weirdo animals to go with their weirdo mother, and they amuse me nonstop. And that, apart from missing him, it was probably a week or two in, and I realized that the laughter had gone because it was so consistent.
Yeah.
So that's what makes me laugh. Who is your biggest spiritual influence?
My biggest spiritual influence, I would say, is my mom, probably, because, you know, I was raised by her to appreciate spiritual things, all spirituality from many different perspectives. You know, she was raised in a pretty strict religious background, upbringing. And then when she and my dad moved to California she was from the Midwest. It was sort of like going there in order to be in a place where she could express who she was and part of that aspect was her spirituality. So, you know, we were raised, I've talked about this on High Vibe shows, right? That she always had a group of people who came over. She had I think she just called it the group. I remember at one point when she put a notice in the local, like, new agey bookstore that she wanted to start a reading group. And she had a group of friends that she collected, and we'd come over once a week, and there'd be like 10, 15 people in the front room doing different crazy, you know, psychic things, like psychic experiments, meditation, whatever. But even before that, I remember her and my dad going to transcendental meditation classes or
your dad
whatever.
went as well. Your dad went as well.
My dad's a Gemini, so of course he'd probably be curious. I don't think he wasn't his thing, but and I remember them going on like a vision, like a Native American kind of vision ceremony at one point, and doing all those things. But my mom also took me to a church, and like then also we'd go to a different church every month and see all these different things, like the Unity Church. And California was full of that kind of stuff in the 70s and 80s, you know, when I was growing up. So that's, I mean, and it's just like, or the astrology book. I mean, she was just doing all that stuff and had an open mind and encouraged me to also have an open mind about that. What about you?
I think my mom probably is as well, because in a time where, and I mean, you would have grown up in a similar time where spirituality, and maybe California was different. I mean, I don't know, but in Melbourne, I don't think spirituality was as pervasive as it is now. And I also had a mother who, so it's interesting. My mum gave me so much, and yet we had such a difficult relationship. But we had a house filled with different people also coming in and out. And we always had psychics and mediums. And I mean, so I used to see spirits when I was younger. I don't see them in the same way anymore. And maybe I could, I don't know. But we always had these people coming in and out. But it was after, I think, my birthday, we'd had people come round one night for to eat some of the leftover food and cake and drink and all that sort of stuff. And while a smaller group of us was sitting around, we started talking about ghosts and things we've seen in the house and all this sort of stuff. And I started telling my mum what I'd been dealing with for the last 6 months, because there was an entity that I kept seeing, and I would always see his eyes first. And going through all of that, it was amazing to not be told I was crazy. Instead, my mum found the appropriate people to help me deal with the gifts that I had and how to protect myself, to the point that when we would go to a funeral and before we drove into the cemetery, my mum would pull over and say, everyone has to be quiet, because I have 3 sisters. So there would be 5 of us in the car. And mum would say, everybody has to be quiet. Natalie, protect yourself, because I would just bring things home. And, you know, we learned about meditation. We had a regular thing. I would say it had to have been for at least a year, maybe longer, maybe just a little bit shorter. But we would do meditation every week. We would do past life regression, all these things. And I think that really gave me a grounding for what was coming later in my life. And all of my sisters are very spiritual. We all have gifts in different ways. And my father says he's not into all this stuff, but yet his current partner is incredibly spiritual. All of his daughters, the older we've gotten, the more we've moved into spirituality. And so my father, as much as he says he's not into it, we'll go and have a reading. He had a reading with Brian when he and my stepmother came to the studio, and always wants to know what's been said when we've had readings. So I think I'd have to agree with you that it was probably my mum for giving us that sort of grounding. And through the years, I think I go through stages with probably the more well-known spiritual teachers, but I think it's because we find who we're meant to find at the right time, and we learn what we need to learn from them. But then we hit a point where it's time to move on and get another teacher, whoever that may be. So I've watched a lot of Dolores Cannon. I haven't read her books yet. I've got about 5 of them sitting in these piles behind me. So all of these people, I think, all are teachers that have had profound impacts. But I think, the grounding from my mother was probably the greatest. What would your
wait, Natalie, we have to answer a question.
Oh, sure.
Because DJ was asking what my mom was, and I also want to know what your mom
Oh, sure.
is.
So what
Like
was
my mom's a Leo with Sagittarius rising, which I think is interesting. And I think, is she Sagittarius rising? And she's a Gemini moon. I just realized that. What about your mom? Do you know?
So my mum, I don't know what her rising or her moon were, because we don't know her birth time. We've gone through paperwork. We can't find it, but we're going to keep looking, because I would love to run my chart and my mum's chart. I think for my mum and I think, first of all, there was clearly a karmic relationship that we were meant to have, but also I was a mirror to her. My mum was an incredibly strong spiritual woman. She was an incredible friend to people. She was all these things, but for her and I, we constantly sort of were fighting against each other. And I think I was a mirror to her, because I always say I'm my mum on steroids. My mum was all about positivity and all this sort of stuff. And I feel like everything she was, I'm that times 10. But my mum was an Aries sun, but she was right on the cusp of Aries and Taurus. So I think she had more Taurus in her than what she realized. And I wonder if part of that was also part of the conflict for her and I. But I say this, and my dad's a Taurus sun, and he and I are so good. So I don't know. But Aries sun, but right on that cusp. I'd love to know what else she had. I have a feeling she had Gemini in there as well, because she was always talking, always on the phone. What would your advice be to people on how to transcend fear?
We came up with these questions.
We did.
I forgot to prepare to think about this. To transcend fear, number 1 is so I think that the fact that we are Gemini risings, we can give good advice for this, because we would be in our heads a lot. And I also have a Libra Mercury, right? So it's a lot of air energy. So we know that for us, especially too, it would be to look for the evidence, right? To don't get carried away. You need to get centered and grounded and verify things before you start getting afraid of things, right? But to transcend fear, I just feel the most important thing to do is to have some sort of spiritual connection and to be grounded. It's, to know who you are, and a lot of people will say, well, I don't know who I am. How do I figure that out? I remember this. Sorry, this is like going off on a conversation now, but I remember being in high school and I had a friend who said exactly that. Like, everybody's always saying to be who you are, and I don't know who I am. And I thought to myself, I don't even know how to talk to this person because I don't know how to tell someone how to discover who you are. But we all get so many messages, and especially now, right, with social media, so much just trying to tell you to be something else all the time. So it's just, put that down, go outside, go for walks, kick your shoes off, act like a kid, get your dog and laugh,
Yeah,
right? And find who you are. What makes you laugh?
exactly. I think for me, and I always use moving over here to the US as an example. I had everybody, and this is the other thing, we listen to these outside influences, and so often we let people get in our heads who they weren't brave enough to do something that we're attempting to do, or maybe our journey is just different to theirs. But when I was moving over here, people kept saying, you can't do it, it'll never work, you're giving up everything that you've got here. And I had an incredible career in Australia. I did have so much, but I was kind of at a standstill and I was bored, and Gemini rising, I was so bored. I needed something different. But I mean, for me in life, I struggle with being stagnant, and all of my charts, no matter which modality you use, I'm someone that needs to keep moving and keep achieving. And I remember sitting there and going, right, do I do this? And do I let go of my safety net of the home that I had and all of these things? And I remember sitting there, and in my mind, I went, what's the worst that could happen? And not the doomsday sort of thing where the whole world is going to end and I can't deal with it, all of that. But realistically, what's the worst that can happen? And the worst that was going to happen was I was going to come over here for the length of the initial visa. I would have an incredible adventure. It would be like a long-term holiday. And then at worst, I would go back to Australia and figure out where I was meant to be. And then I went, what's the best case scenario? I go over there and I have a life that is everything that I've dreamed it to be and everything that it's not right in this moment. And then the other question was, if I don't go, what does my life look like? And for me, it was, I would always wonder if I should have taken the opportunity that was presented to me. So for me, I always I look at these worst case scenarios. And I mean, if I'm in a situation where the worst case scenario is death, that changes the outcome of something, right? But in terms of going and making a huge life change or taking a risk in terms of career or something like that, I always go, you have to trust that the universe will catch you. And there is a moment, and honestly, moving over here, I felt like I was leaping off a cliff. And I just went, the universe will catch me. It will all end up where it's meant to be. But I think with fear, you have to get out of your head. I think everything that you said was correct. Go outside, go for a walk, connect with your animals, do something to ground yourself and get yourself out of this spinning vortex in your mind. And you need to be brave and think about all the things that could go right. Obviously, always be prepared for the things that could go wrong. But I think rarely do we end up in a position where we go, well, this was the worst decision I ever made.
Right.
And even if you end up in that position, you've learned something at the end of it, and it's a life lesson, and you'll generally never repeat that sort of pattern again. I ended up in an abusive relationship after my marriage ended, and I always like to be very clear that my ex-husband was a wonderful man. The one after him, not so much. But even that I wouldn't trade for anything, because it changed who I am fundamentally as a person. And I think to get caught up in the fear of sort of taking those risks, it was part of my growth cycle. So this is why I say the universe will always catch you. And then finally, Miss Anne, what is the best piece of spiritual advice you've ever been given? I think this is a tough one because I can't decide between about 5 things.
Maybe I should have you go first because
Okay.
I can't think. You've got 5 things, and I'm like, spiritual advice.
So I
All
don't know
right.
if this is so much advice, but more mantras that I live by. But I
Mhm.
think that they're very apt, and this is the internal dialogue that goes on in my head when I'm sort of dealing with all these different things.
Mhm.
Right place, right time, right reason. You're
Mhm.
always going to be exactly where you're meant to be for what needs to come next. And I think that's absolutely true, even if the timing doesn't sync up with what it is that we want or need it to be. The other one is this too shall pass, because we all have these cycles and seasons in life that are so incredibly difficult, and it always passes. It always does. We just have to get through it. And so rather than focusing on, I'm stuck here in this storm, and I say this as someone that's 2023 sucked so hard for me. It's the worst year I've had, I think, since 2007 when my mum passed and I was getting out of that abusive relationship and what have you. So just knowing that it'll pass and there are brighter days ahead, I think always helps. And then the other one was, this is my latest one and I love this. Rejection is a universe's protection.
Mhm.
And I think so often in life, things don't happen. And again, we're sitting there going, well, I want this at this time and I want it on this timeline and all of that. And maybe it's a relationship somebody doesn't want to be with us. Maybe it's a job that we didn't get. And there was something last year that people were trying to make happen for me. And anyway, I got a phone call today going, you're so lucky that didn't actually come to fruition. And I heard
Mhm.
all the reasons why. And sometimes we don't always know why something didn't work out. We'll never get those answers, but I've learned to not become emotionally attached to these things, because the universe always has our back. And so I don't know if those things are, so that's 3, not 5. I don't know if, or was it 4? I've lost count.
I don't
But
know.
I don't know if that's necessarily spiritual advice, but those are the mantras that I live my life by. The other thing is I always meditate, trying to ground myself. If I'm going into a difficult situation, I'll always meditate and then protect myself. And I think that when you do that and you're grounded, life becomes so much easier.
Mhm. Yeah. Those are all amazing. And, I will say that the only thing, well, I mean, I have 2 things in mind, of course, because I'm a Libra and a Gemini, right? I got to have the 2 things going on. But the first thing I will mention is that I used to have a friend in high school who was the most Gemini friend I had. Like, just, she was a Gemini. She was a person who was advanced a grade when she was younger. She asked a million questions. She knew everything, and she made everybody else feel like the dumbest person in the room just because she was so smart. Then she also had this crazy side where she would do anything, right? And I was like the sidekick, the Libra sidekick, who's a little more reasoned, right? But it was just like a tornado coming into the room with her. And her motto was always, if it feels good, do it. And I always think of that. It's just like, because I don't tend to think as wild as she did, probably. I think we don't, like, that is such simple advice and crazy advice, right? But we don't take time to feel
Mm-hmm.
what we really want. So it is good advice. And it doesn't mean you're going to run off and be the craziest person in the world to just say, oh, if it feels good, do it. No, if you really think about what feels good, you think about everything for what feels good for the people around you and all of that, right? If you can just tune into what is really the best thing for you and what your intuition is saying. Because, and I'm sure for her as a Gemini, that would be a really important piece of advice to get out of your head, right? And to get into your body. But the other thing I would say is, I don't know if this is advice, but all of the best advice I've ever needed or needed at any particular moment has always come from reading. So, and I don't know whoever told me to read, like nobody ever said, you should read because your spiritual advice will come from reading. But and there's in particular, like the books of E.M. Forster were really foundational at a certain point when I read, was it Howard's End, I think, which not everybody will know, but he has at the beginning this little motto. It just says, only connect. And I love that, because that is such another kind of Gemini rising thing of so many good things can come to you if you are brave enough to go to new places, like what you did by coming here from Australia, right? There's so much to learn by going somewhere, to be curious and to take in everything you see and to not just judge it, right? But to look for human connection. And I would say I feel like that's pretty good advice. If it feels good, do it, and only connect. Right?
I completely agree. I think they're wonderful mottos to have. And I think all of these things come back again to transcending fear, which was our previous question, because we live in a time where everybody is fearful of so much. And I think when you can let that go and you're able to be present, because who was it? Somebody said, if you have anxiety, you're living in the future. If you have regret, you're living in the past. But when you're just present, that's when you're actually living. And I think that's so important, because so rarely are people present. And that was the thing about my trip last weekend. She and I were both present. We were there for each other. We had the most wonderful time, and we were both sad to sort of go. But I think the beauty of it was, I can't remember the last time I was so present with someone. We weren't caught up in anything else. It was just that. And I think that feel good theory and connection, that's exactly what it was. And it was the greatest weekend.
Yeah.
So I've had so much fun. I feel like this show was very Gemini in terms of, we kind of had a plan for how it was going to go, and we've gone off on all these random different tangents. I've done what I do and told a million stories that nobody asked for, but you're all welcome.
But they were perfect and interesting, and I listened and told my own stories, and there you go, very Gemini-ish.
Right. And I would like to thank everyone, because even though there is the first episode of Gemini Rising up on the main page, this is the first time we've gone live on YouTube. So it's been so exciting to have everybody in the chat. I would like to say a special thank you to Frankie. I know she dipped out just a little while ago, but thank you for being here and moderating for us. We so appreciate you. Everybody that is waiting for the announcement of who's coming up next. Hopefully next week we'll be able to announce that and let you know who our next guest is going to be. Thank you for supporting Gemini Rising. And Anne, thank you so much for doing all of this with me. That's okay. You can do it. You can press the button.
But I'm so Gemini Rising. I'm sitting here like, but I can't escape. My screen was frozen, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to stop. What am I doing?
Oh, you didn't look frozen to me at all. But thank you to everyone. Thank you to Anne. Thank you, Anne, for being the one doing all the technical things once again.
And please catch us on High Vibe TV. If you are on YouTube and you don't know, that's where you can find us for Full Disclosure and History in the Stars. Correct. And the Golden Thread and all the other things that we do.
And we will have the link for High Vibe, if you're not a High Vibe member, in the description below.
All right. We'll see you all next time.